Okay, I think we can get started right away. So hello, everyone. My name is Annelies. I am the project manager of the SciComm Academy at SciMingo. SciMingo is a Flemish non-profit organization here in Brussels, and we want to help researchers to reach out to a broader audience with their work. And specifically with our SciComm Academy, we do this on one hand by organizing in-person trainings where we want to help you reach out using different platforms. For example, we want to help you reach out about your work in a 3-minute video pitch or on social media or in a blog post. But we also want to help you to include everybody in your research or in your communication by organizing trainings in inclusive science communication. On the other hand, we also organize these monthly free online lunch talks, like the one of today, where we cover a wide range of topics related to science communication or research. For example, the topic of next month will be a Dutch lecture by a scientific philosopher, Ruben Mersch, and he will tell us more about polarization. So where did it originate? How can we tackle this as scientists or as researchers? So if you're interested in staying up to date about this initiatives or other lunch talks, feel free to scan this QR code to register for our newsletter, or you can discover all of our lectures and our upcoming courses by scanning the other QR codes. So for our topic of today, I'm happy to welcome you in our talk, which we are co-organizing with the Belgian Women in Science organization BeWiSe. So for that, we are joined by the president, Anne van der Jeugd. So we're organizing this talk in light of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, which was on February 11th. And today we will mainly cover the topic of gender differences in research, as well as the gender data gap in research. Because it's quite known that gender influences research for quite some while. It's mainly known in life sciences that women and men, for example, react differently to medicines, that the sensitivity is different. But still, we see that the impact of the gender aspect is not covered in all different research areas, or that the implementations are not fully known. So we think it's still important to cover this today. And we will also look into the importance of the underrepresentation of women in histological research, because it still impacts us today, especially if we think about the implementation of, for example, artificial intelligence or AI in future methodologies. So this is also something we really want to talk about today. And for this, I invited 3 speakers with us today. You can see them here all with us. I will introduce them shortly to you soon. They all encountered or tackled the gender data gap or the gender differences in their research. So they will very shortly introduce themselves and their topic to you in a presentation. And thereafter, we will engage in a more interactive panel discussion to really cover all of the aspects and also your questions. Sorry, I'm a bit ill. So I encourage you all to ask your questions in the Q&A window or in the chat window, and then we will ask them during this interactive discussion that will be hosted by Anne, the president of BeWiSe. I will also love to ask you to stay tuned till the end of the talk, because at the end I will share some resources, some important initiatives or calls that are all related to the topic we're covering today. So please stay tuned, and I hope you have a very inspiring and engaging talk with us. And I think it's now time to give the floor to our first speaker, and that is Jelena. Jelena is from the University of UNamur, and she mainly looked at climate change adaptation. And today she will tell us more about how the gender data gap influenced her data collection during her research. So Jelena, floor is all yours.
Thank you for this introduction. I will share my screen. I hope everyone sees and hears me well. So indeed, today I will talk about the gender data gap and mainly about data collection and how this influenced my research. And to directly dive into this subject, I first wanted to just zoom out and have a quick look at the bigger picture, let's say. Maybe some of you are familiar with the DHS data, which is the Demography and Health Survey. So it's basically a very large database, including a lot of information, and which is widely used by, among others, demographers and geographers. And so I have some colleagues working with this data, and I went on the website to see what was mentioned, and the first thing that pops up is actually this message that the DHS program has collected, analyzed, and disseminated accurate and representative data on population, health, HIV, and nutrition. And so, well, I was very pleasantly surprised that they mentioned that they have representative data on population, and I wanted to see, well, how they did that. And so basically they have 3 questionnaires that are used at the household level. So 1 household questionnaire, 1 men's questionnaire, and 1 woman's questionnaire. And so I was surprised because I was expecting that there would be only 1 questionnaire. So I was really rather positively surprised, let's say. But digging a little further into these questionnaire and the DHS program, I saw that, well, women are included between the age of 15 and 49, and that for men, this was between 15 and 49, or increased to 54, 59, and 64. And so I was a little bit intrigued by why the eligibility for men was for a larger range than for women. And the only information I found on the DHS website was just that they decided to increase the range of men to include older adults. And, well, digging a little further, I found out that probably the reason behind is because, well, women between the age of 15 and 49 can bear children. And this is maybe a little larger for men. But the fact that they decided to broaden the range for men and not women just keeps the gendered role, or it keeps the focus that women are, as a primary role, the bearers of our children, and well, having to educate them. So I was very pleasantly surprised that they include both men and women. Well, we can still see that if we take a broader programs, and this is true for other large databases, well, that you still find very quickly some gendered biases and gender differences. So let me dive in more on my research and zooming a little bit in on my topic, which is adaptation to environmental change. So I decided to do research on this topic. And a first thing that I have to acknowledge is that there's a large consensus that we need to do this at the household level. We need to do research on adaptation on the household level, and in particular in Africa, where is the setting that I am carrying out my research. So this is all well, but then if we look a little in the literature on adaptation to environmental change, we can basically have 2 groups of papers. The ones that are gender blind and those who are gender aware. And not surprisingly, there are way more articles in the gender blind aspect than those who publish with gender aware databases. And so basically, well, in the gender aware, there's often a focus on gender. So they really focus on the differences that there might be between men and women. They try to explain why this is a problem. And then in the gender blind, it's more neutral. And so this is problematic because then we don't have actual research that does not focus on gender, but include it. But so, okay, we have more gender neutral or gender blind and gender aware research, but who do they include in research? And so this is, of course, a generalization, and you will find other examples, but more broadly, if you look at it, well, in gender blind, they interview or survey or question the head of the household. While for gender aware literature, they mostly include more of a variety of persons. And so this is men and women, but also people with disability or elder or younger people. So we find a more diverse group of people that is interviewed. And so coming back to this gender blind literature, interviewing the household head, well, this is problematic because, well, the share of female-headed households over the world is lower than that of men, and in particular for Asia, Southeast Asia and Africa. And so if we interview the head of the household, we tend to interview more men, and so generate a gender bias because we then give more importance to, well, their lived experiences and how they live and respond to the questionnaires and answer to surveys. And so this being said, we also need to look at which data is gathered, because in literature, there's quite also a consensus that, well, between objective information and subjective information, there is a difference. And so gathering objective information, well, is less problematic to go to a proxy report and to ask the head of the household about, well, household composition, income, employment, because these are facts. And, well, they tend to be true, and yeah, it doesn't bring any different information if you interview a man or a woman. Well, for subjective information, then it becomes more problematic. We're talking about perceptions, opinions, behaviors, and there's something very personal. It's some lived experiences, and there, if we interview only the head of the household that will also report for others, well, we tend to be more biased because, well, he will report what he knows on the first sense, but this also influenced by his values and how he lived the things. So up until here, well, I quite agreed with this idea, and it seemed quite straightforward, but through my research, I think it's actually also problematic for at least some of the objective information. And so if we just dive a little bit more in my research, I looked at household adaptation to environmental change in rural Senegal, looking at the question of who adapts, when, how, and why, and in particularly when. I was very interested in the chronology of adaptation. And to do so, I collected information on socioeconomic characteristics of the household, perceived environmental change, and adaptation measures. And so I should mention that I interviewed 17 households with at least two individuals, two members of the household being interviewed, and in most cases, one man and one woman. And so just to give you an idea of how this presented itself, so here I'm interviewing a woman, and so we complete together during an interview a timeline. And so I'm putting all the information about household characteristics, such as employment, but also the perceptions and adaptations on there. So that's just to, so you have an idea of which data I'm working with. And so if we look at this, I would say that socioeconomic characteristics and adaptation measures could be considered as more objective information, while perceived environmental change would be more considered as subjective. And so socioeconomic characteristics and adaptation measures, I always asked at the level of the household, and perception I asked for the individual I was interviewing. But let's take a look at adaptation measures more closely. If we look at the adaptations that were mentioned by women and men, I have your list, and on top we have those that are mostly mentioned by the group, so by women or by men, and it's only a few of them. The list goes on, but those are the main ones that are mentioned. And so, well, what's interesting here, in the top three of the adaptations mentioned by women, we have water drainage when the house was flooded due to heavy rain, and we have also the fact to sleep outside when it's hot. And we also find back this sleeping outside because it's hot by men, but, well, quite lower in the list. So it's not the first thing that comes up. And so overall, well, women tend to give more information on adaptations that have been put into place in the house, for the household, while men, this is something that is sometimes mentioned, but it's not the first thing that comes up. But if we look at the first and most important adaptation, or maybe not the most important, but like the one that comes up most by women, is the fact that they chase birds in the field that come to eat the seeds. And this is also something mentioned by men, but well, it's something very economically linked. And actually, if you look further into it, well, it's because it's actually the children that go in the fields to chase the birds. And so, well, women are more aware, and because of the gendered roles in rural Senegal, well, they tend to be the ones that need to take care of the children and of the household. And so, well, they tend to be more aware, or it has at least a more significant impact on their lives. And so it's something that comes up quite quickly when, well, during the interviews. And then, of course, not surprisingly, for men, well, it's more the economic activities and the adaptations within the economic activities that come up first. And it should also be mentioned that we have specific adaptations that come only up by men or by women. And adding to this, it's also very interesting that women also engage more and more in economic activities, but they tend still to be like more complementary activities. And so they do not often see it as an adaptation. And so it's more recent, let's say, in time. But so just in light of this like small view on my results, well, we can see that it's actually very important to have and to interview multiple members, to have and to study the household. If you only interview the man or a woman or the head of the household, you only have a partial view on the situation, and you basically cannot say that you are looking at the household level, because you only have just one specific view that is going on there. And this is also true for objective information. I mean, I'm not talking about like household composition and like very straightforward facts, but for anything that is implementing new things or changes that occur that might also be seen as, well, facts and some objective information, there still might be a bias that is introduced if you only interview one person. And I also really want to stress again that interviewing the head of the household actually generates a gender bias, because then we tend to interview more men. And this is problematic because then for policies, well, we tend to know more about the realities of men. And so they're more included in policies that will be developed afterwards. And so we need to, well, be more aware of the situation and the lived experience of women to take those also into account. And so to just end on this point, I think that including everyone in the process not only promotes gender equality, but also improves the overall effectiveness and equity of environmental adaptation efforts, and it will ultimately benefit entire communities and ecosystems. So thank you very much, and I would be pleased to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jelena. So indeed, feel free to ask your questions already in the Q&A so we can take a look at them, and we will tackle them after our next two speakers. So next up is Dr. Kandice Kreamer Fults. She's from the University of Brussels, and her research focuses on household travel choices, and she wants to understand why people make certain choices related to transportation and how gender affects these choices. So Kandice, it's all yours now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Yes, now it's correct. Is it correct that you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak here in this lunch seminar. I wanted to start by saying I particularly enjoy this format of discussion because we're all presenting from different fields of research, and I believe our audience, we can assume, is the same, coming from many fields of research. So therefore, I have the opportunity to start by presenting some general discussions about transportation research, things that we all may cope with every day, but didn't necessarily reflect on how there could be a gender data gap or a gender bias in these situations. So I would like to open thinking about persistent gender data gaps in transportation, specifically ways in which gender differences in transportation needs have been and continue to be neglected or discounted. And then I would present one of my research focus, which is childhood independent travel. Next, I will show you a few concrete results from my data analysis. And then lastly, I would love to situate these results into a presentation on a cycle of gender bias in transportation. Regarding transportation gender gaps, in recent decades, there have been continually more research done which identifies gender differences. And I believe that's going to be noted much in this lunch seminar. But the key word here is that it's identifying. But there are lasting effects from the planning and design that allows us to see how neglecting these gender differences in needs, what it has produced. And here I'm also speaking about gender bias. So a gender bias that has existed in the collection of data for transportation, in the representation of data, and in the field of transportation, and in the treatment of the data. All of this has led to an unbalanced design and transportation design, I should say, and transportation system. I'm going to mention a few interesting gender gaps that I've organized under these three topics, but they're not exhaustive, and perhaps they've come about based on my own research interests. Accessibility restrictions. We'll start with care work, the need to accompany small children, elderly, and others with mobility issues, as well as carrying many items, perhaps. Now, this can include mobility for wheeled mobility devices and prams, and also other childhood mobility. But when accessibility for public transit is not fully realized, it is ultimately the female population that will bear the bulk of this inaccessibility. And not specifically because women are more frequent users of mobility devices, but due to their overwhelming share of chaperoning and care trips. Also, the facilities and design of public transportation, public spaces, it's commonly noted that public space has an issue of accessibility to toilets, which also has a huge gender gap. But it can also be the actual design of public transport itself. I'm thinking, for example, entering a crowded bus or metro, and you need to stabilize your body. A quick look at data told me that the average Belgian male is 179 centimeters, and the average female is 164 centimeters, which means I'm exactly average. And I very often feel very insecure and vulnerable when trying to stabilize myself in a crowded public transport. Some transportation daily needs is the next category. I'll start with care work again, but from a different lens. This is the need for women to perform more and shorter trips than their typically male counterparts. A transportation system is notoriously and historically built with a typical linear male-dominated commuter pattern in mind. And so therefore, it's not built to a typical, sorry, I shouldn't use the word typical, to a woman's needs. Similarly, women are more constrained in their transportation choices due to smaller budgets in general. And these choices already may be limited from the outset due to finances, and then they enter into a system that has not been designed for them. It creates a very large gender gap in service and satisfaction from our transportation systems. Finally, something that may be the first thought when one wants to discuss public transit gender inequalities, and that is safety and security in public spaces. Some things that come to mind are lighting and visibility, particularly at nighttime for bus stops and train platforms. Women overwhelmingly feel less heard and insecure when public facilities lack security. Also, going back to the vehicle design, when you are trying to secure your body on a public transport vehicle and you can imagine the difficulties and the vulnerabilities that are created when you have a smaller or sexualized body in these scenarios. And that leads us finally to the response and prevention programs of harassment and violence encountered in public spaces. Now I come to a slice of my transportation research that I enjoy, which is children's independent mobility. Independent mobility is when a child is able to travel without an adult or older supervision. This is synonymous with unaccompanied or unescorted or unchaperoned travel. And because children under 18 years old cannot drive, they are necessarily traveling, when they are traveling alone, they are necessarily not traveling by automobile. So they are most likely in the public space or taking public transit. I want to quickly cover some of the benefits of independent mobility because I will reference this in the end. But there are many noted benefits of independent mobility for children of all genders, which includes, related to what I'm going to present, increased confidence in neighborhood navigation, confident decision-making and route choice, and this is very important, but an increased sense of ownership of their surroundings and a connection to their surroundings or their neighborhood. And there are emotional benefits as well that have been found for independent mobility, but this doesn't necessarily play into what I'm speaking of at the end. My empirical analysis is based on 2 national Belgian travel surveys that are excellent sources of information for childhood travel. It's not necessarily typical to have such detailed information for children's travel. Combining these 2 data sets, the gender split is nearly equal, as you can see here by the numbers. And just to give you the most basic statistic to start off our discussion on independent mobility, in Belgium, from these data sets, we see that 31% of female children's daily travel is an independent trip, autonomous trip, and 36% of males. So just even from the beginning, we see there is a gender gap in agency. So using this data, I created predictive statistical models to represent children's independent mobility based on gender and age, but also level of urbanization of the residents. And here are the categories which you will see in the results. Quickly going to the results, we can, by using these segmentations, we can see some of the extremes of independent mobility for children in Belgium, with the youngest amount of agency coming to female young children, and young children represent children 11 years old and younger, outside the urban system or the most rural areas of Belgium, to the highest level of agency, which is experienced by male teenagers in the urban center at 63% of their daily travel being independent. Interestingly, we see the gender gap in independent agency is around 3% for young children under the age of 12 or 11 and younger. And these age groupings were based on school attendance levels. So this would be primary school age kids. However, we will see that teenagers experience a significant shift to automobile travel, from automobile travel to non-automobile travel when they reach young teenagehood or 12 years old. And that is reflected here in this graph. This is automobile travel. And you can see that when they go into teenagehood, their automobile travel halves. And interestingly, in the model, gender was insignificant. So males and females, teenagers are shifting away from automobile travel at the same rate, which in an equal world would shift to the same rate of independent travel, because non-automobile travel opens up more opportunity for independent travel, as we discussed earlier. However, when we go back to this rate of independent mobility, you'll see that while the difference between the gender gap between independent mobility for young children was hovering around 3%, for teenagers, it dramatically widens, 50% to 3 times as much almost. And so we're looking more at 6 to 11% difference in independent agency for females and males, even though they are shifting to non-automobile travel at the same rate. And then because of this, I wanted to create a graphical interpretation of my thoughts on gender gap, parental permission, societal attitudes. And as you can see from this causality dilemma, there is no start point to the cycle. And that is exactly the point of this graphic. I've included a gradient here, and it's an imprecise representation of the gender gap. But we spoke earlier about the benefits of childhood independent mobility. So I'll start here at childhood independent mobility. And here we can apply that information. Presuming the benefits experienced by childhood independent mobility are unequally distributed by gender from a young age, we presume that females grow in a different space than their male counterparts, going to the next step, growing up and navigating public space. This resulting feelings of confidence or vulnerability or familiarity or ownership are presumed to continue into adulthood and possibly parenthood, particularly without any interventions. Then in parenthood, the adults must formulate their own notions of agency to their children. And so the question I would like to pose is, where do we interject the interventions for equality? And does it matter if it is a continuous cycle, or is it actually truly a continuous cycle? And this is, I will speed through because I want to be exactly on time. I will thank you very much for listening, and note that this might be a picture to say why children shouldn't be traveling independently, but it was an animation of a retired metro, so they were not breaking any rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Kandice. I think you touched upon several interesting points there. It's sad that we only have a short time for each speaker, of course, because all of you have many interesting things we can cover in more detail afterwards for sure. So we'll now just continue with our last speaker of today, who will cover a complete different aspect. So this is Dr. Maria Corrêa, and she will share with us the consequences of the historical underrepresentation of women in hard sciences, with a focus on AI today, as I believe.
Thank you. I will just share my screen. Okay. Right. Let me just. All right, good. Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this nice invitation on the talk Unveiling the Gender Gap in Research. Just my presentation is going. Yes, I don't know. Just 1 second. I don't know how to do. Actually, we did this before. Just to not leave it changing by itself.
You mean to go to the next slide, or?
To not go directly without me pressing the button. Okay.
I think there's a pause button at the bottom of your slide.
Okay, I will do it again. Sorry for this. All right. Now I cannot have access to it. Okay. All right, so I hope that it's going to work now. So, but thank you. Thank you for it. I will give you a policy perspective. So it's a bit different from what we heard from our previous speakers. As you may know, there are always several possibilities when we're talking about gender gap analysis, and I particularly like two angles, right? The first angle I like talking about is when there is underrepresentation or neglection in the data collection per se, and this is something that Jelena and Kandice talked about. Another possibility of analysis is the question of gender imbalance in scientific careers, or underrepresentation of women actually making science, right? Concerning the data collection per se, there is a very good example, and I believe Kandice illustrated this very well in the transportation sector. But there is an example that I always discuss with AI developers, the designers I work with, and this example concerns actually car safety. So car safety research has dealt with the problem of bias in the collection of data, particularly referring to failing into taking into account shorter individuals when designing their products. As you know, and as Kandice mentioned, statistically speaking, and I would not fall into this statistic because I'm a very tall woman, but statistically speaking, men are taller than men. And in the past, this has impacted actually the design of safety tools for the car industry in different levels. For example, the seatbelt effectiveness was less optimal for women due to actually improper fit. Also, the airbag protection for an average woman for some time was improper because of the force and also the level of the airbag situated in the car. Also, there were problems related to neck injury, because in the event of a collision, women may have experienced actually more problems than the average man due to the difference in sizes. So this is to show you with very practical examples how actually not taking into account data and gender in data may affect in applied research different segments of the population. And I like talking about this aspect of gender gap, but there is also another gender gap that I really like addressing, and it's actually underrepresentation of women in science or women making science. I like addressing this topic as well because I have been to different conversations recently regarding gender equality, and I have the impression that in Europe, everything is pretty much perfect in terms of gender balance when we are talking about research teams across universities, but also the private sector. And for these two different angles, for the data collection problem, but also for the inclusion of a more diverse teams, there are also different policy and legal answers for this problem. And for example, concerning the data collection problem and the development of artificial intelligence systems, as you may know, the Artificial Intelligence Act will touch upon this issue with very interesting resources actually to address bias in the development of artificial intelligence. The AI Act is currently under scrutiny of the European Parliament. We will probably see the AI Act into force very soon. But because BeWiSe invited me to talk about this specific subject in 2 weeks, I decided to talk policies regarding gender equality and representativeness in the research teams. And I like to approach this angle by providing you three different things. A little anecdote. I think little stories are good, actually, to reflect on these things. Numbers, how the situation is right now, and policy actions undertaking in the European Union, actually to create a more equal environment in research and development. So I always like initiating my talks on gender equality in science by recalling the story of this very distinguished woman you see in your screen right now. This distinguished woman actually is the patron of the most precision European research funding, actually. She is Marie Corrêa, right? Marie Corrêa is very well known in the different scientific circles for having developed research on radioactivity that was ultimately very important to the fight against cancer. But I think her personal story gives us a very interesting perspective on how women have struggled in the past century, and I'm talking about 100 years ago, have struggled actually to have their presence in the scientific circles. So she was born in Warsaw, in Polonia, or Poland, and by the time it was not Poland yet. But anyhow, she was born in Warsaw. She came from a very liberal family, and she decided that she wanted to study. The problem is that universities in Warsaw did not allow women to go to courses or to study, actually. So she decided this fact would not prevent her from enrolling to her academic studies, and she went to something that was called the clandestine university. The clandestine university accepted women at that time, but as you know, a clandestine university was not officially recognized, and also the clandestine university needed to have their classes in different locations of the city to prevent public authorities from finding them, because very often, actually, women and students and professors were arrested for allowing women to study in this university. And this story by itself, it's pretty much impressive and inspiring, and I like telling them to young scientific girls and anyone who is committed to academia. But it doesn't stop there. She decided to go to France and to continue her studies in the University of Paris, and she developed a very nice research on radioactivity again. And it's interesting because it's a big team of researchers. One of the members actually is her husband, Monsieur Corrêa. And when the research is finalized, they decide to submit it to the Nobel Prize. And at that point, the researchers were completely against introducing her name, actually, in the research. And her husband had to really fight to have her name in this research. And it was in this way that the first woman she was the first woman actually to receive the Nobel Prize in Science. So it's very interesting, this story. And this was not enough, actually, to overcome her overlap her woman situation, because the French Academy of Science decided to reject her membership, even though she had achieved all these nice things. So this was 100 years ago. I would like to ask you a question, or to make you think, how are things in terms of gender equality in science 100 years later? And I am very happy to say that things are much more inclusive, and we see much more diversity than we used to see 100 years ago. So all these struggles were actually very worthwhile, right? But I still believe that there is room for improvement. And again, I'm telling you these numbers because in the circles I'm part of, there is a very optimistic view of women in science, specifically on ICT, because I work with engineers, data scientists, and I think the picture is not very well framed very often. So less than 1% of girls actually aspire to work in ICT-related careers, and this is in the most developed countries of the world, in the OECD countries. Over the past decade, only 8.4 of inventions with patents were created by women in the G20, which is an even more selected group of developed countries, economically developed countries, I would say. The gender gap in computer program skills is still a reality, and women are underrepresented in software development, according to the International Telecommunications Union. So some statistics pictured by the She Figures, which is a nice institution, by the way, shows that actually the percentage of men in research and development is higher than the corresponding percentage of women in most European Union countries. And as you may expect, the gender gap is even more substantial in one countries than others. So if you look at Cyprus, for example, the situation is worse than in Denmark, which is actually doing a pretty good job. And if you bring the numbers closer to us, in the institution where I work, for instance, only 30% of our professors are female, while 20% of full professors are female. This is a little bit dated. This statistic is from 2019. I hope in the past 5 years, the situation has improved a little bit. But this is to show you how the reality is currently. Of course, the European Union is pretty much aware of this fact and has invested a lot to improve this reality and to create a more diverse research environment in the past 12 years, I would say. So since 2022, gender equality in research and development has been a priority for the European Union Commission. So in a communication of 2012, so 12 years from now, the communication is called Reinforced European Research Area Partnership for Excellence and Growth. It was already highlighted that the gender dimension should be integrated into research cycle, all research cycle stages, and also evaluation criteria. So we should address gender imbalance in decision-making process involving research. We should also implement concrete action plans to address gender balance, but also we should include gender dimension in research content. And if you were familiar with the Horizon Europe funding program, for instance, you may be aware that one of the requirements is actually to the promotion of gender equality into the institutions. And how is it done actually in practice? In practice, they ask you, if you have submitted a proposal, probably you have to answer this question, whether your institution has a gender equality plan. But what is a gender equality plan? A gender equality plan actually is something very practical. It's a set of actions that your institution should take into account and should implement in order to guarantee a more balanced environment for researchers. So, for instance, your institution must conduct audits to identify gender bias into the institution. Your institution must implement innovative strategies to address identified bias. Your institution must also set targets and monitor progress via indicators. So these are one of the few elements of the gender equality plans that I think are interesting, but there are many others actions that your institution can put in place to guarantee a more balanced environment. And I think, to be very honest, despite my skepticism in the beginning of my presentation, I really believe that the European Union is going to a very much less imbalanced direction in terms of numbers in the career, in the scientific careers. But I still believe that we need action in one particular element, and this particular element is regards the leading position. So we see that the numbers are increasing among the researchers, the number of women women, but we see that they are less in leadership roles. And this is very important. Why this is very important? To include a more balanced scenario in leadership roles, it's because leaders often shape research agendas. So incentivizing and fostering more diversity in leadership will not only balance the numbers regarding the leaders, but also will shape research agenda and will also make perhaps the content of research less or more focused on addressing gender bias, for instance. And well, with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. And of course, if you have questions regarding specifically artificial intelligence and the Artificial Intelligence Act, you can ask me during the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna, as well. I think we can jump in immediately in questions. I will maybe just ask one, and then I will give the floor to Anne van de Jeugd to moderate the questions of all the people that are listening. So we're talking about gender here, mainly men and women, but how do you think, or how did you define gender in your research? I'm talking to everyone. And how do you think that we should expand the concept of gender in the future? Because of course, we're not only talking about men and women these days. Is that something you want to comment on? And anyone of you?
Mine is straightforward for what I presented because it's not my data set, it's a national data set. So I could only present gender as two options, but absolutely when we're talking about safety and security in public spaces, which is linked to parental perceptions for independent mobility, I mean, it's intrinsically linked. It would be really important to eventually come to studies which include a more diverse range of gender identification. Absolutely. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with national data, and this can also evolve, right? So when you're dealing with national data, you are left with what has been asked. And that's where I'm coming from.
Well, in policy and law in the European Union, well, first of all, if you look and you read the law, it will say sex, right? But the Court of Justice has recognized a more modern vocabulary to refer to sex, which is gender. And the Court of Justice also has recognized that the protection against discrimination it's not only referred to the biological sex, but also to reassigned persons or also to the self-identification. So it covers all these possibilities, and this is from the policy and law perspective.
That's very interesting to know indeed how the policy is going.
I completely join what Kandice said, and I feel like in research today, and like women tend to be like more looked at than other like minorities and stuff, because like they actually are not a minority but not included. But of course we should continue and broaden the perspective, because well, we should make the world more livable for everyone and include everyone in the discussion, and that starts also with like including them in research, of course.
Okay, thanks again to the speakers. We will start now with some questions from the Q&A. The first one also thanks you for your interesting talks. A question to Kandice. You showed that causality dilemma at the end of your presentation. Which of those four aspects do you believe is most likely dominant?
Yes, the simple answer is empirically, I can't say, or even perhaps anecdotally. I see it completely as this causality chicken and the egg situation. We don't know. Could it be that because we've grown up a certain way, even though we all have grown up in different ways, we're different generations, but having that sense of ownership and that feeling, and not just for the female side, but also males who have observed this. Maybe it's not that they feel less ownership and therefore restrict their children in different ways, but maybe because they have experienced this and have seen it in their peers, their siblings perhaps, etc., that they also utilize that in forming their permissions, let's say. But I wanted to be to push a bit and to show that, and to have people think maybe we are in this cycle, and so maybe interventions can be injected at all levels because it is a cycle and it's a circle.
Okay, thanks. Then we have some other interesting questions. It's a general question that we also prepared for all of you. What type of policy action do you think could help to support institutions to do more, and also for the culture to change, of course? Perhaps thinking of assessment of research careers, and do you think that universities are sufficient on board enough? Maybe we start with Anna.
Yes, for sure. Well, I really believe in raising awareness and training. I think there is a lot of room for that, and I think it improves actually providing this to young researchers, but also older researchers, to create this environment where people are informed on the necessity of having a diverse space. I believe in that because I've seen in practice how this has improved some environments that I was part of. And so this is my first answer, short answer for this question.
Thank you. Let's move to Kandice, perhaps.
This is much more of an administrative question for me, but yes, I suppose I would say anecdotally, I hope that through recognition comes action, and that's what I was talking about, these gender gaps, where we're identifying gender gaps. It's the first step, right? We have to recognize and identify, and then push for the action.
Okay, Jelena, you have something else to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with Anna, and I just wanted to also mention that today we often try to have gender equality, to have 50-50, to have a woman in this or this group, and I think this might not be the most perfect way of going, because then you also put a lot of burden on women, because well, they're, for now at least, less present, and so they're more asked to participate. And so it's also trying to balance, and maybe we first need to start to improve the equality and representation and the number of women present before we can put this burden on them. And so it's really through training and through information, and that we will get these numbers up, and then we can indeed ask to have equal representation.
Okay, thank you. Then we have some questions for speakers separately again. For Anna, we have twice the same question, so I think it's something burning. Can you provide us some more information on the role of gender in the AI Act?
Well, I understand that you mean a role of gender, of protecting gender bias and discrimination against women. Well, there are many things that actually the Act will provide. First of all, the Act is a high-risk. There is a high-risk approach, a high-risk-based approach. So it means that certain uses of artificial intelligence will require extra obligations from the developers. And which ones are those? At this point, we know that they are the ones used, for example, in education and vocational training, in the employment and workers management. So, for example, if I use an AI tool to promote, to help to promote my staff, for instance, it will be considered a high-risk AI system. High-risk AI system, they must pass to a conformity assessment. And in this conformity assessment, there are few requirements for this sort of system. So, for example, for an AI system to be considered trustworthy AI, They need to have documentation, traceability, transparency, human oversight, accuracy, all these elements actually that must certify that the system is trustworthy. And this will probably raise awareness on the issue, but also will oblige researchers and developers of AI system to dig into the question of bias and discrimination. This will be a requirement imposed by law. And who is going to enforce this? Probably, well, the courts, but also there will be national authorities in the 27 member states. We have the Data Protection Authority nowadays in the 27 member states, and there will be one for artificial intelligence. So there will be many interesting elements on the Artificial Intelligence Act actually to counteract bias in general, not only related to sex or gender.
Yes, this is actually something interesting because there was another question in the chat. What could be done to improve the data collection of gender in actually tracking these biases in research? Because indeed there is the data protection law, so it's not even allowed to ask for gender in certain sectors.
Yeah, it depends. It really depends on the context. All these regulations are dependent on context. So if you ask me, someone suggests, well, let's hire 50-50, right? 50% women, 50% men. We have to approach this with cautious, actually, because we cannot discriminate someone based on their gender, regardless if it's a man or a woman, right? The only possibility we have is if we have an underrepresentation, and I'm talking only about gender. This is much more complicated when we talk about race or other protected grounds. But gender, if there is an underrepresentation in my institution, during the recruitment process, I can consider the gender if the merits are exactly the same. So it means that the two candidates, they have to have the same merits. So they have to be as good. And this is a very subtle thing as well to assess, but it means that they are identical individuals. They are just diverse in their gender. And if there is an underrepresentation in my institution, then I can consider gender there. For men and women in this case, because we don't just protect women, we protect the diversity and gender equality, I would say.
Does somebody else have something to comment, Kandice, on this aspect of the data collection? And
no, I think Anna's answer is amazing. Wonderful.
I think it might really be interesting to hear Jelena's aspect, because you, in your research, gender was not a first thing to consider, but you managed to still be able to cover it correctly. So maybe you can give some advice there.
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare to actually start collecting data and like including gender without having a focus on it. I think this needs to be, we need to strive towards this. And I think it was also just like, my idea was just to interview multiple persons in one household, because I was working on the household level, but like for some I had 2 women and 1 man, for some I had 1 man and 2 women, and like yeah, I think we just need to broaden the perspectives and to be aware that lived experiences depend on gender, and I see gender not only men, women, but also broader. And at least in like data collection, I think there's not really a question of RGDP. Well, I mean, you need to protect everyone, and of course, like there's standards, but like you can include everyone, and from the moment you protect them, and you don't expose them, then like let's just include everyone.
Yeah, there was a question that we already prepared in advance. So, in what ways do you believe that other researchers can better integrate the gender perspectives in their studies? If it's not a central focus, but still might play a significant role. You have some suggestions for that?
Very broad question, but I think from the moment you are aware that lived experiences are different for different people, then you intuitively start to include them in your research, because then you know that well, your results are biased and like directed to a certain group of individuals. So I think it really goes through awareness, and I think this is really very proper to the researcher. Like if you are aware that there's a difference, then you will naturally include it in your research. So I think we really need to continue to raise awareness, and there's a bunch of literature that I feel like should be more broadly diffused, like because they talk about these differences and they really highlight very like to the point like why we should include different groups. And yeah, I really think it's by raising awareness and having knowledge that you will just naturally include it. And it's not like having 50-50 or having this, it's just like it will come naturally, and also with the population you're approaching.
Thank you. Now another question for Kandice about your topic. Person was wondering if the fact that girls are generally traveling less in an independent manner also might result in the fact that as an adult they also feel less confident in navigation since they practice it less.
Yes, absolutely. That was the relationship that I was. I'm not going to say it's my idea, just something that I'm thinking on is where does it start? There is no start point, perhaps, and who can say at this point, but absolutely, if female children get less of the childhood benefits of independent mobility, the known benefits of having access to that type of travel, then we have to assume that that follows through in their life cycle, and then that starts informing back if they are parents. And for both, like I said, it could also be a man who is growing up in this and sees a difference for his female counterparts, and that also informs his decision-making process as an adult, a parent. Sorry, but absolutely, I completely agree that it must have an effect on the life cycle of a person. What you are experiencing as childhood without some interventions, and that is the question: could we intervene? Could we have initiatives and interventions at any cycle stage of this cycle, which would help independent mobility as well?
Yeah, indeed, that was my next question. What are some potential interventions that could help empower female adolescents to travel independently? Are there some already? Yeah.
Yes, there are suggestions, even some that could be address the cycle if we adopt this cycle, if we are willing to accept it in this discussion, such as education. Education is commonly referred so that you can feel confident as a parent that your children are being educated on road safety, and then also so that the children feel confident in road safety, because in actuality, many studies have shown that it's traffic safety, which the parents are most concerned about. There are other issues, of course, but traffic safety is a overwhelming concern for parents in allowing their children to travel independently. And so if we can improve, or if one can improve this education, both for the parents and the children, the other part would be, of course, designing more safe and secure. Normally it's focused around school travel because this is a common trip for children, but implementing safe school zones so that one can start normalizing independent travel for children at a young age. So before maybe we're thinking about other vulnerabilities that are gender-based, if we can start seeing primary children having equal access because the space is so safe and secure.
Okay. Yeah, I have a personal question also related to that. As a parent of 2 young children, I remember my old childhood days where there was no mobile phones and we could roam the streets like 5 to sometimes even 7K. Now we have some kind of society, I think, that there are helicopter parents that always want to make sure that their children are close by, or they have playgrounds in the back garden even. How do you think that this type of, let's say, parenting style influences kids' mobility? And do you think there's a difference between mothers and fathers even?
Well, I have a few comments. One is that some changes between assuming we're all in the same generation, changes between our generations of parenting is changes in activities for children. So I will make assumptions here. We grew up, like you said, playing outside, exploring, and having access and being out of the house and being out of our parents' way. But now the activities have changed to much more organized activities. So there could be more reliance on a parent to deliver those children to those activities, depending where they are. This is one change. Another change that's obvious is automobile access. Automobile access has increased and it has changed travel patterns over time, and this will naturally come into play when our parents are delivering us to places we need to be. There are some studies, I haven't looked into the difference in parental attitudes, but absolutely there have been some studies. I can think of one in Canada where they were seeing the difference in permissibility of parents. And they did find that the male parent in a two-parent household was more permissive or gave more agency to the children. And this can reflect back to the cycle that we talked about, possibly, yeah, that women might feel a bit more anxiety and vulnerability and reflect that onto their children. Mm-hmm. This is only theoretical on my part.
Okay, then a question for all three of you again. An increasing amount of scientific literature covers across different disciplines, in addition to gender, also the intersection between gender and race, religion, and other characteristics when studying social phenomena. Does this occur within your discipline? Maybe we can start with Anna.
Well, this is the Pandora box, right? When we talk about discrimination. Well, the term intersectionality was coined by an American scholar who actually said that white American female had very different problems compared to Black American females. The sort of problems were completely different. The white American females actually wanted to work when they were requesting for equality. But the Black American females, they already worked and they wanted to be less discriminated in other areas. So yes, this is something that occurs me to all the time when you're talking about policy making. And also intersectional discrimination is not recognized as a form of discrimination by the Court of Justice yet. So the Court of Justice just analyzed the different criteria separately. And some people say they are missing actually a very important segment of the population when they are using this approach. So there is a lot going on in terms of law and policy and intersectional discrimination.
Okay. Do you have something to add to that, Jelena?
Yeah, I feel like globally in research, it's very hard to have transdisciplinary research, and the research remains very much in the domain. So it's like it starts, and I'm working in geography, and I feel like feminist geography is starting to gain some momentum, but yeah, I think it's still very, very boxed. Like every research domain is very on its own, and it's very hard to connect things between one another. And this is also true for gender. So let's hope this will get better. But it starts to mix, but it's very subtle and well, on its premises.
Mm-hmm. And Kandice?
Yes, I'm thinking, because I look into behavioral research in a way, and so it could come to actually analyzing what we could call gendered behaviors instead of actually gender identification. So if we want to equalize the transportation system, for example, we don't have to say, okay, it's women who are making lots of short trip-link trips, even though in general it is women who are fulfilling those. However, if we want to normalize this or equalize the system for different types of transit users, we can base it on these typically gendered travel behaviors instead of just simply the socioeconomic characteristics.
Yeah, I think in view of that, one of the calls that I'm launching in a few minutes at the end of the talk is very interesting in this view. So just stay tuned. We will tell you more about it.
Yeah, indeed. And then maybe a general question also. Do you know if trainings on gender bias already exist? So yeah, I see Jelena.
Well, there are now masters in gender studies, so I feel they're quite accessible. And I did a research day in the institution in gender, so I feel they're very open. But I just wanted to mention the gender portal of Europe, and there you have some resources and also recommendations on resources and anti-gender bias training. So resources exist, but I feel like you still have to be very proactive about it. But yeah, I mean, things exist, and I don't know if specific trainings for researchers exist, and they might start to develop, but there is definitely information available.
Yeah, I think if I can say something, it's indeed like that now. We still have to organize specific things, or you have to look for it yourself. But I hope that in the end, it will become a more general incorporation in research or in management as we go on. So we're also organizing one of our courses now, inclusive science communication, and we will of course also incorporate the gender aspect there because we think it's still important to highlight it and to focus on it actively at the moment. So I will also link maybe the course in the follow-up mail, so you can all register if you're interested in a training.
I think we managed to get through the burning questions, and there are some more general questions in the chat. One is personally addressed, to me. So indeed, I was invited by Her Majesty Queen Matilda. Join her for lunch on International Women's Day. Unfortunately, it coincides with our Women in Science Day at the University Foundation. Of course, I will not join then for the Women in Science Day, but accept the offer of Queen Matilda. And the things I want to discuss with her are basically the things we discussed today, to include women as a subject, of course. Talking from my own background, I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I investigated Alzheimer's disease for 15 years. So I think I can also add my 2 cents there, that we also have to include, of course, more, let's say, women as a study subject in all the phases of research for medicine. For instance, also the links between menopause and dementia are not studied at all. So I think, if I get a chance to say something there on that topic, I will definitely do it. There's also another general question in the chat for BeWiSe. If we would write a memorandum, and indeed we're thinking of doing that. Looking to the upcoming elections, of course, I think we should definitely do something like that. So I will invite a few key players in the field also here, policymakers, soon. So on the Women in Science Day, I invite you all to join us. The registrations are still open. You can also register by scanning, it's this side, the other side, the QR code here. And I also have a slide here. Yeah, thank you, Annelies. So the topic is the Matilda effect. What a coincidence, but indeed it is something that happens to women even at higher levels, that they are less, for instance, nominated for prizes and also less visible. It can be also at a younger stage of career, when you're writing a paper and you have to discuss your position in the affiliation list, in the author list, sorry, all those little things. So we will discuss this with a lot of speakers from many institutions in Belgium, coming from KU Leuven, Jeugd, VUB, but also ULB, Liège. So I would say very welcome to join us.
I also wanted to highlight some other initiatives. So the ISALA project, I think many of you might know it, has also launched a new project, the Rufaida project. I hope I pronounce this correctly. So they're also looking for participants. So if you are or you know someone who is joining the Ramadan this year and wants to contribute to research on the effect of fasting on the health of women, please join this research. It's very important. It's something new. It's something important. So you can find more information in this QR code or by scanning or in the follow-up mail. And two other things that are very important is something we touched upon before. So if you are someone who's engaging in science communication or in research, and you find that you're taking less seriously because of some of your identity biases, we're also interested to know more about this, and we invite you to participate in a master thesis study and to share your experience in some focus discussions, and you can hopefully bring about some change there. And then lastly, something I personally contributed to, I think 2 years ago, is the new call for Soapbox Science. If you don't know Soapbox Science, it's an initiative to share your research in the streets of Brussels, but it's an international event, so it's happening everywhere. As a woman or as a non-binary identifying person. So if you're interested in doing so, please apply before, I think, it's the end of next week. And you get the chance to get a training and to share your research to bypassers in the streets of Brussels.
Yeah, it's really worth it. I also participated some years ago.
Nice. Okay, I think with that, we can conclude today's session. I hope you all had a very interesting time and you gained a lot of insights. Of course, if you're interested in knowing more, I will link a lot of information here, also the contact details of all our speakers. And we hope to see you in our upcoming talks. And thank you also to our speakers, of course, for sharing all of these interesting things. I find it very interesting myself as well. And I hope to see you soon. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.